Okay, thank you all for being here. In this session, we will try to discuss some important issues from the text itself, the study of poetry by Matthew Arnold. I hope that you can see the text on your screen. Can you see the screen? Is it visible there?
Sir. Yes, sir,
okay.
can.
Okay, that's good. I will
Yes,
try
sir.
to enlarge it a little bit. So, okay, so now I think you can see it a little bit clearer than before. Okay, so I'll be reading the very first paragraph and then I'll ask you questions. So listen to it carefully. Now here it says, the future of poetry is immense because in poetry, where it is worthy of its high destinies, our race as time goes on will find an ever surer and surer stay. There is not a creed which is not shaken, not an accredited dogma which is not shown to be questionable, not a received tradition which does not threaten to dissolve. Our religion has materialized itself in the fact, in the supposed fact. It has attached its emotion to the fact, and now the fact is failing it. But for poetry, the idea is everything. The rest is a world of illusion, of divine illusion. Poetry attaches its emotion to the idea. The idea is a fact. The strongest part of our religion today is its unconscious poetry. Now, I have a question for you. He has mentioned here, our religion has materialized itself in the fact, in the supposed fact. It has attached its emotion to the fact, and now the fact is failing it. You tell me that. Why actually he's saying that religion is failing? Can you tell me that why religion is failing and why actually he is very much optimistic about the future or destiny of the poetry? I mean, from this paragraph, what is your understanding? Can anyone tell me? Just think about Matthew Arnold's, of his time. I believe that you read some of his poems. So which particular literary period does he represent? Can you tell me? Which literary period does he represent? Matthew Arnold? Can anyone tell me? Did you read the poem Dover Beach? Anyone? Dover Beach? Hello, can you hear me? Masum, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just tell me that Matthew Arnold, which particular literary period he represents?
Hello?
Which particular period, actually, Mr. Matthew Arnold, which particular literary period does he represent? Victorian age, I guess actually you're familiar with this term, Victorian age, remember that? Do you remember? So now tell me,
Sir.
okay, now tell
Yes,
me,
sir.
what are the very common characteristics of the Victorian age? What happened at that time actually? So Victorian age, we have seen the unprecedented kind of industrial revolution, because before that, it was a rural economy, especially in England, but with this kind of industrialization, the urbanization was going on there in every part of the England, and especially England itself became the hub of the commerce and industry for the whole European, other European countries. So as a result, because of this, people become very much materialistic. So religion, actually, it was losing its effect, its influence on the people. And that's why he's saying that poetry, religion itself, it will fail, but poetry will survive. So he's saying that for poetry, the idea is everything. So the world itself is an illusion, but the poetry is the ideal. So it is the ideal. So idea will survive. That means poetry will survive. Poetry attaches its emotion to the idea. So we will attach an emotion and idea. So here you see the combination of emotion and idea, we can call it that it's a kind of thought. So in that sense, the combination of emotion and thought. The similar thing also we found in the tradition and the individual talent, the combination of the unification of sensibility, that we call unification of thought and emotion. So we can also see similar kind of, facts, that poetry attaches its emotion to the idea. So the attaches, that means the combination of emotion and the idea. And he's saying that the idea is the fact, but for him, idea is more than emotion, or it's more than feeling. It is a fact. So poetry is a fact. So the strongest part of our religion today is its unconscious poetry. So poetry, actually, that is the strongest part of the religion, because our religion is going to be poetry, as he's saying, because the religion that we mean, it's going to lose its effect because of the advancement of the science and technology of the Victorian era. Now, now here, the second paragraph is saying that, let me be permitted to quote these words of my own as uttering the thought which should, in my opinion, go with us and govern us in all our study of poetry. In the present work, it is the course of one great contributory stream to the world river of poetry that we are invited to follow. So now we are invited to follow the river of the poetry. We are here invited to trace the stream of English poetry. Now, the stream of English poetry, that means the whole bunch of English poetry. Now, that we have to trace it, and we are invited to follow it. But whatever we set ourselves as here, to follow only one of the several streams that make the mighty river of poetry. So when actually we want to follow the river of the poetry, then we'll find that you know that river actually, that is the combination of the streams, the flow of water. So the strongest flow of water he is talking about, that is the strongest form of poetry, English poetry he is talking about. That means all the poetry in English literature, they are not prominent, they are not important, they're not classical. So he is only mentioning the important poets or poems, or he's actually trying to talk about the classical English poets. That means poetry which are important because of their quality. Not all the poetry actually he's talking about. So that's he's saying that, but whatever we set ourselves as here to follow only one of the several streams that make the mighty river of poetry, one of the several streams. So there are different flows, there are different streams of water, and to make a river, and here actually these streams means the streams of poetry, and out of all these streams, there is only one stream which is very important. Of whether we seek to know them all, our governing thought should be the same. Or even if we try to find out all the best poetry in the in the English literature, then even in that case, we have to be governed by the same thought. We have to govern by the same rule to judge the best poetry out of all these streams. We should conceive of poetry worthily and more highly than it has been the custom to conceive of it. That means now he's saying that we have to consider the worthiness of the poetry, or the best that we have in the poetry. We have to conceive it, we have to understand it, and we try to regard it very highly. We should conceive of it as capable of higher uses and called to higher destinies than those which in general man have assigned to it hitherto. Now he's saying that common people, they might not find that kind of, what should I say? The dignity or that kind of importance in the poetry. But he's saying that as people, as the writer, we should, or as the critic, we should find more in it. In the poetry. That means we should have the capacity to evaluate poetry, more than the common people. So that is actually what he's talking about here. Now, he is also saying that more and more mankind will discover that we have to turn to poetry to interpret life for us. So now he's saying that in the coming days, people will find the utility of poetry more than before. They will find that the importance of poetry. And what is that importance? That people will use poetry to interpret life, to understand their life, to console us, to sustain us. That means poetry will console us. It will give us a kind of satisfaction. It will help us to sustain, to stick together as human beings. So he's saying that poetry has this kind of functions in the future, and that's why poetry will survive. And you see the last line of this paragraph in this page, he's saying, without poetry, our science will appear incomplete. And most of what? So you see, our science will appear incomplete. That means the scientific discovery, or whatever you say, it will remain incomplete without the help of the poetry. So he says that the most of what now passes with us for religion and philosophy will be replaced by poetry. So one day he's saying that that is the destiny of the poetry, or the future of the poetry. That is, he is predicting, he's saying that religion and philosophy, these two fields of knowledge, that will be replaced by poetry. And about science, he says, science, I say, will appear incomplete without it. So he's saying that without poetry, science is incomplete. Then he says, for finally and truly does Wordsworth call poetry the impassioned expression, which is in the countenance of all science. And what is a countenance without its expression? So you see that science is the countenance, science is the appearance. And if science is the appearance, then poetry is the expression. So you can see that science actually science is complemented by poetry. So without poetry, science itself is incomplete. And when actually he was talking about it, you see he has mentioned Wordsworth. Then he says that Wordsworth called poetry the impassioned expression. Impassioned means passionate expression. So poetry is a kind of passionate, or you say it's very, it will evoke emotion. When you read poetry, it will evoke emotion out of you. So that's why he's saying that it's an impassioned expression which is in the countenance of all science. So in the appearance of the science, you will find that there is poetry, there is harmony. Again, Wordsworth finally and truly calls poetry the breath and finer spirit of all knowledge. Someone is reading the text, I guess. So if you please just, excuse me, if you really want to read it, then just mute the button. Just keep your microphone muted.
Riyazul Islam.
Riyazul Islam, okay. Maybe he was reading the text with me. But anyway, here we see. Again, Wordsworth finally and truly calls poetry the breath and finer spirit of all knowledge. So you see, he's quoting Wordsworth. So Wordsworth also, he talked about poetry that the breath and finer of those on which, the breath and finer spirit of all knowledge. So you can see the breath means the breath that we take. In Bengali, we call it nishash, proshash, that is the breath. And the finer spirit of all knowledge. And he says that that is the best of all knowledge. And what is that? That is poetry. So poetry is the life, and poetry is the best of the spirit of all knowledge. So poetry is the life of knowledge, and poetry is the best spirit of all knowledge. That is the soul of all knowledge. So that is, what Wordsworth is talking, or he's commenting on poetry in that way. And our religion, parroting evidences such as those on which the popular mind relies now. Our philosophy proving itself on its reasonings about causation and finite and infinite being. What are they but the shadows and dreams and false shows of knowledge? So he's saying that the philosophy actually deals with lots of different stuff, like finite things, infinite things, and also religion is talking about different stuff, and philosophy is also trying to, to show us cause and effect of different things. But he's saying that all these things are nothing but shadows. They're just like dreams. They're just like shadows. And that's why they're false. So he's saying they're the false shows of knowledge. So what are they? Nothing else but false shows of knowledge. This philosophy, this religion. So only poetry is the fact, poetry is the truth. So the day will come when we shall take them seriously. And the more we perceive their hollowness, the more we shall prize the breath and finer spirit of knowledge offered to us by poetry. So he's saying that that the quicker that it will be for us that we can identify, or we can see that the religion and philosophy, they're fake. They don't have anything to offer anymore. The quicker it will be that we'll understand the importance of the poetry. So the quicker we can understand the shallowness of religion and philosophy, the quicker you will be able to understand the true spirit of the poetry. That poetry is the spirit, the true spirit, or the final spirit of all knowledge. You will be able to understand it very quickly. The more quickly you will understand the shallowness, or you can say that the fake essence of philosophy and religion. So, but if we conceive thus highly of the destinies of poetry, we must also set our standard for poetry high, since poetry, to be capable of fulfilling such high destinies, must be poetry of a high order of excellence. Now, he's saying that if you really think that poetry will survive and it has a very good future, then certainly you also have to set some standard for poetry. You cannot call everything that looks like poetry, you cannot call all of this poetry, because for being poetry, we must set some standard so that after that we can say that, okay, this is a poem. So just to consider the greatness of the poem or the superiority of the poem, you have to set a perfect or a high standard. In that way, you can say that poetry has a high destiny, or poetry has a good future. You can be optimistic about the future of the poetry if you can set the high standard for the poetry. Now, we must accustom ourselves to a high standard and to a strict judgment. Now, here he is mentioning Saint Beauvais relates that Napoleon one day said, when somebody was spoken of in his presence as a charlatan as much as you please, but where is there not charlatanism? Yes, answered Saint Beauvais, in politics, in the art of governing mankind, that is perhaps true, but in order of thought, in art, the glory, the central honor is that charlatanism shall find no entrance. Herein lies the violence of that noble portion of man's being. Now, actually, he's talking about charlatanism. Now, he's saying that this, I told you in the previous lecture that charlatan means something which is fake, something which is very showy. But inside there is no essence, but outside it looks very good, very attractive. So this charlatanism means this kind of fake thing, or you can say it's a kind of treachery, it's a kind of cheating. So he's saying that where actually don't you find this charlatanism or this mediocrity? We call it something which is very mediocre, not of good quality. So why actually you don't find this kind of mediocrity, or you don't find this charlatanism? Everywhere you can see it. You can see it in politics. There is cheating, there is fake thing, or you say the fake idealism is there. There is charlatanism there in politics, also there in art, there in literature. So he's saying that everywhere you can find it. But what he's saying that in poetry you cannot have it. If you have charlatanism in poetry, or this kind of showiness in poetry, or shallowness in poetry, that will not make it a great poetry, and poetry will lose its charm, and also it will not be regarded as something which is of high value or high importance. So that's why we need to be very careful, according to Matthew Arnold, that there couldn't be any kind of, this showiness or shallowness in poetry. There is no chance of it. Now he's saying that charlatanism is for confusing or obliterating the distinctions between excellent and inferior, sound and unsound, or only half sound, true and untrue, or only half true. So he's saying that charlatanism is for what? For confusing or obliterating the distinctions between the excellence and inferior. That means maybe you can find that some of the writers or poets, they will try to express their ideas in words in such a way that they will show off. They will use a very you say very difficult words and excellent ideas, but there is no essence in it. There is no good idea in it. That means you cannot take anything out of it, or you don't get emotional. It's just the use of bombastic words and very attractive words, high sounding words, high floating words that we call. So you will find in them, but and as a result, what will happen that people will find it difficult to find the difference between which one is great and which one is excellent and which one is inferior. So this charlatanism, it confuses people. And because of that, readers find it very difficult to identify that which one is a great poem and which one is the inferior one. Or which one is sound, that means which one is good, and which one is unsound, that means which one is bad. So that's why he's saying that we cannot have this kind of fake or this kind of showy look in the poetry. You cannot have it. If you have it, then the people or the reader, they will get confused and they will not be able to identify the good poetry. So in poetry, more than anywhere else, it is unpermissible to confuse or obliterate them. So that he's saying that it is completely prohibited, utterly prohibited. In any way, it is not permissible. You cannot allow it. This charlatanism, you simply cannot allow it in poetry. Because if you, you don't have any right to confuse, or you don't have any right to obliterate. That means to destroy the distinction between the excellent and the inferior. Because if you apply this charlatanism in your poetry, then that will obliterate, that will destroy, that will wipe out the distinction between the great and the mean, between the great and the low kind of poetry, between the excellent and the inferior. So that what will happen, that reader will not be able to choose the great poetry to read or to cherish or to enjoy. So that's why he's saying that charlatanism is completely impermissible. It is, in his language, he's saying unpermissible, but we say that it's impermissible, it's not allowable, it's not, we cannot, allow in any way these kind of shallowness in poetry or showiness in poetry. For in poetry, the distinction between excellent and inferior, sound and unsound, or only half sound, or true or untrue, or only half true, is of paramount importance. As I have already said, that in poetry, this is very important, that we must know the difference, and we have the capacity to demarcate between these two things, that is the excellent and inferior, sound and unsound, true and untrue. This is very important. That's why he's saying that is of paramount importance. It is of paramount importance because of the high destinies of poetry. As he mentioned it in the very first paragraph, that poetry has a high destiny. So because of that, charlatanism or this kind of fakeness or this kind of, you can say, showiness is not permissible in the poetry. In poetry, as a criticism of life, under the conditions fixed for such a criticism, by the laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty, the spirit of our race will find, we have said, as time goes on and as other helps fade, its consolation and a stay. So here you see, this, this line is a long one, but we'll take it beat by beat, and this is a very important one. Here actually he's saying that in poetry as a criticism of life, that means poetry is a criticism of life. Now, if you just ask you a question, please try to give me your answer, what you understand by it. That if I say that poetry is a criticism of life, now you just tell me that, can I have any chance to be fake in poetry? When if I say that poetry is a criticism of life, can I be fake? Or can I show off? But in reality, that is not there. Can I do that? Or as a poet, do I have that right? That I will, I will deceive people by presenting the life in a different way, in a distorted way. So do I have that right as a writer?
No, sir.
Now you see, if poetry is a criticism of life, that means life will be presented, in poetry as we see the life, as it is, then in that case, there is no chance that you will concoct it, you will fabricate life in a different way. So you cannot show off. So that's why he's saying that in poetry as a criticism of life, under the conditions fixed for such a criticism by the laws of poetic truth and poetic beauty. So in poetry, there should be poetic truth and there should be poetic beauty. And since we have to have poetic truth, that means truth and beauty must be there. And this cannot be distorted. So that's why we cannot have that kind of charlatanism in poetry. Then he goes further saying this, that the spirit of our race will find, the spirit of our race, that means at present time, he's talking about the Victorian people who are living in the Victorian age. He is talking about those Victorian people. He's saying that our race, that means English people, or generally you can say the people all over the world, they will find their consolation, their satisfaction, that we call shantana. That means when actually you will be in a difficult situation, where actually you will get this consolation. এই shantana কোথায় পাওয়া যাবে? You will get it in the poetry. So that's why poetry must be true. There must be poetic truth and poetic beauty. You cannot distort it. You have to keep it as it is. So shallowness is not allowed in poetry. So, but the consolation and stay will be of power in proportion to the power of the charism of life. And these consolations, see, proportion to the power of charism of life. The way actually you will, you will have the poetic truth and poetic beauty. The way actually you will put them in the right proportion. In the same proportion, you will get the charism of life in the poetry. So if there is a little bit of shallowness and most of it is true, then you will also get a little bit of shallowness in the charism of life. So, but if you're completely true to yourself and your representation of life is completely true, in your work, then definitely that is going to be a true charism of life. But if there is a little bit of shallowness, little bit of, fake stuff is there, then there will be a little bit of charlatanism, in your poetry. So as a writer, you have to decide that what kind of criticism of life actually you are going to forecast, through your poetry, through your work. So you have to decide it. So, and the criticism of life will be of power in proportion as the poetry conveying it is excellent rather than inferior, sound rather than unsound or half sound, true rather than untrue or half true. So you see, it must be true, it must be excellent, and it must be, sound. So he's saying that the criticism of life in poetry, it must be like this. So otherwise, the proportion that actually we are looking for, the criticism that we are looking for, it will not be found in poetry. Now, he's talking about the best poetry. Now, he's saying here, the best poetry is what we want. The best poetry will be found to have a power of forming, sustaining, and delighting us as nothing else can. So the best poetry is that will have the power to form us, that will have the power to sustain us, that will have the power to delight us. And nothing else can do that. Religion can't do that. Philosophy can't do that. Philosophy can't form you completely. Philosophy can't sustain you completely. Philosophy can't delight you. So that's why he's saying that only poetry, it has the capacity to have all this together. So that's why when actually we have all these qualities or traits in a poem, then we'll call it, that is the best poetry. Now he says a clearer, deeper sense of the best in poetry and of the strength and joy to be drawn from it is the most precious benefit which we can gather from a poetical collection such as the present. Now he's saying that a clearer, deeper sense of the best in poetry and of the strength and joy to be drawn from it. So if you can extract, if you can get the strength and joy, from the poetry, so that is the precious benefit that we can get from the poetry. What we can get? We can be strengthened by the poetry. That means we will feel inspired by poetry and we'll be delighted by poetry. That means we'll find happiness in it. And if we can get these things from a poetry, so that will be the precious benefit for us. And yet in the very nature and conduct of such a collection, there is inevitably something which tends to obscure in us the consciousness of what our benefit should be, and to distract us from the pursuit of it. We should therefore steadily set it before our minds at the outset and should compel ourselves to revert constantly to the thought of it as we proceed. Now he's saying that if we really want to have that kind of thing, those strength and joy, if you really want to extract or achieve out of poetry, then obviously we have to set a rule, we have to set a standard before we expect that kind of stuff, expect that kind of thing from poetry. Now, but this real estimate, now he's saying, yes, constantly in reading poetry, a sense for the best, the really excellent, and of the strength and joy to be drawn from it should be present in our minds and should govern our estimate. So you see, we should have a kind of estimate. Estimate means, okay, what do you mean by estimate? Can you tell me? Your understanding of estimate. Generally, what do you understand by the word estimate? Can anyone tell me what you understand by the word estimate? Anyone? The word estimate means? Jinath or Lina, are you here with me? Bushra, can you tell me what do you mean by estimate? The estimate, I mean the general meaning of the word estimate.
স্যার এস্টিমেট মানে জমিদারি বা ধন সম্পদ এরকম টাইপের
That is estate. E-S-T-A-T-E, but I'm talking about estimate. E-S-T-I-M-A-T-E, estimate. To
তো
estimate.
কাউন্ট করা
Exactly, to count, to recon, to
হিসাব টাইপের কিছু
exactly, to evaluate something, okay? To judge something, that is estimate. Now he's saying that we have to estimate and we need to do it very carefully. How can we estimate that? So he's talking about two different kinds of estimate. One is historic estimate and another one is personal estimate. And according to, Matthew Arnold, he's saying that, all these kind of estimates, that is historic or the personal estimate, both of them are fallacious. Now, you see here he's saying that the historic estimate and the personal estimate, both of which are fallacious. A poet or a poem may come to us historically, they may come to us on grounds personal to ourselves, and they may come to us really. They may come to us historically. The course of the development of a nation's language, thought, and poetry is profoundly interesting. And by regarding a poet's work as a stage, in this course of the development, we may easily bring ourselves to make it of more importance as poetry than in itself it really is. We may come to use a language of quite exaggerated praise in criticizing it, in short, to overrate it. Now he's saying that if you try to judge or estimate a work on the basis of this historical background or considering the history of that particular poet. For example, our Matthew Arnold, actually he is from the Victorian age. And if you think about Victorian age more, and if you try to estimate his work, his poetry on the basis of the traits and characteristics of the Victorian era, according to Matthew Arnold, he is saying that you are going to do a huge mistake, because you are not, then in that case, you will focus more on the history than the poetry. So that's why he's saying that this historic estimate is fallacious, is erroneous. We cannot do that. And on the other hand, for our this personal estimate, he's saying that our personal affinities, likings, and circumstances have great power to sway our estimate of these or that poet's work, and to make it a task more importance to it as poetry than in itself it really possesses, because to us it is or has been of high importance. Now he's saying that we have our personal likings, we have our personal dislikings. So if you bring your personal likings or desire, or that you call affective fallacy in a sense. So if you bring those, these fallacies, your personal likings and dislikings, affinities, and your personal circumstances to evaluate a poem, a poetic work, then what will happen there? You will be biased. You will not be able to impartial. And then if you like a poem because you have a personal liking for that particular person, then you will talk highly, you will exaggerate his work, but actually his work are not as great as you're saying. So that's why he's saying that this personal estimate and this historic estimate both must be avoided if you really want to set the high standard to judge a poetic work or to judge poetry. Now, I will not go for further discussion on it. So far, I think that you have understood it. Now, let me see. On page 6, I'd like to jump because he will go further on these things. Now, can you see the screen on page 6? Just look at the screen. Do you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
On the screen, on the left side, it's in line 10, beneath that line 15. You see the right of the line 10, there is a paragraph. It starts with, indeed, there can be no more useful help. Found it? Have you found it, found the paragraph?
Yes, sir.
Indeed, there can be no more useful help for discovering what poetry belongs. Got it? Okay. Now here
Yes, sir.
I'll read a little bit. Indeed, there can be no more useful help for discovering what poetry belongs to the class of the truly excellent, and can therefore do us most good than to have always in one's mind lines and expressions of the great masters, and to apply them as a touchstone to the other poetry. So this is the idea, the touchstone method. So he has introduced now this touchstone method, and this touchstone method will help us to set a high standard for the poetry. So we will take this touchstone method, and then we will try to compare and contrast the contemporary works or any other works from any other ages, and we'll take this method, and then it will help us to understand the work of art, that whether it is an excellent work or whether it is of inferior quality. We're able to estimate it. Okay. Now, let me explain to you. Now, you see the touchstone method for your basic understanding. You can see. In the jewelry shop, you will find that the goldsmith, the people actually who works with the gold, the artist, or rather I should say the artisan, the goldsmith, they take the gold and they try to hit the gold against a specific stone. That stone is called touchstone, because that stone will tell the goldsmith, it will help the goldsmith to find out that whether that gold is original, authentic, or whether it is corrupted or mixed. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you follow this?
Yes, sir.
So the goldsmith will use a stone, and he will use that stone to just to identify, or just to find out that whether that gold is solid or original, authentic or not. Similarly, in the touchstone method, we'll apply the same technique, but here instead of a stone, we are using some lines, beautiful quotations, beautiful paragraphs from the classical writers, the great writers. So if we find that for example, if we compare a work, X is the work, and we are comparing it with the work of the Shakespeare. So we have extracted several lines from the Shakespeare's, one of Shakespeare's plays, and we have put it one side, and on the right side we have put the work that we want to compare with the Shakespeare's work. Now we see that the work X that we have collected, actually it matches with most of the qualities of the Shakespeare's work. What actually Matthew Arnold actually is suggesting, is saying that if your work actually, if it has to be great, then there should be some qualities in it. He's saying that it must have highest poetical quality, and the characters of high quality, characters must be of high quality. So the poetical quality will be the highest. Characters of that particular work, they will be of high quality. And also the both substance and matter on one hand, and also the style and manner on the other hand, they also mark the high beauty, worth and power. So you see the substance, matter, style, manner, character, poetic quality, and also there must be high truth and high seriousness. It must be serious. If all these traits of Shakespeare's works are found there, in that work, then we will say that that work is great. That work is, it's just like the work of the classical work. Then we can say that that is of excellent quality. If we find that the work that we're comparing with the Shakespeare's passage that we have already extracted from one of his plays, if it doesn't match these qualities, that means poetical quality, high quality, and characters with high quality, and also beauty, worth, power, high truth, high seriousness. If these things are not found in the work of the X, then we'll say that that is an inferior work. So this is the way that the touchstone method actually it works in reality, according to you can say Matthew Arnold. And when you actually really want to compare words, practically we also use this method occasionally. It's not that we don't use this method. Knowingly or unknowingly we do that. If I ask you to compare two words, one from the past and one from the present, for example, two novels from one novels by for example Rabindranath Tagore's Shesher Kavita, and the novel, one novel from by Humayun Ahmed. So if I ask you to compare them, then certainly actually, I mean, knowingly or unknowingly, you will use this method, because you will take Tagore as, I mean, the greater than obviously the Humayun Ahmed, and then you will try to find out that whether Humayun Ahmed's novel have these qualities as Tagore's have in his novel. So if you find that, or even if they're related, I mean, even they're close to that one, then you will say that yes, Humayun Ahmed's works are really great, and they're, to some extent we can call them classical. If we compare them with the works from the past. So this is the more or less the idea about this. So these are the most important ideas from this text, the essay by Matthew Arnold, The Study of Poetry. So with that note, I would like to conclude our today's lecture. So if you have any question, you can ask me now. Otherwise, I would like to conclude our today's session. So do you have any question or any opinion or any comment or any suggestion if you have? Do you have any question? Dear students, do you have any question or any opinion or anything? I mean, was it clear? Today's discussion, I mean, was it clear to you? At least you could understand something from the text?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's why actually I chose today that I should go through the text. So now you're familiar with the text. It's a very, I mean, renowned one, and you will find that some of his ideas are, I mean, they are oft quoted. They are quoted in different articles. So you can find them. So that's actually I found it very important and also very useful that I should discuss it with you today. So if that is that you have understood, then if you don't have any question, then I'd like to conclude it here. So thank you very much for your cooperation. And with this, actually, we are going to conclude our 42nd lecture, and this is the last lecture of this semester. So I really appreciate your cooperation, and thank you very much for everything you have done so far in this course. And still, if you have any
Thank you,
problem,
sir.
just contact me anytime you want.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
You're
you.
most welcome. You're most welcome. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
sir.
Thank you very much so far.
Thank you, sir.
You have done.
Sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, and I'll be very glad, really, if you have learned something out from this course, and that will be really a great pleasure for me that you have learned out of this course. At least something. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Assalamu
Assalamu
Take care of yourself. Take care.